all that in a bag of
And
chips.
there's some funk in there. And I don't mean in a bad way.
It's complex.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. When you're given a gift, you make mead with it. So some of you might have seen the video that Derek put up where we basically lost all the fruit and stuff that we had grown and stored in our freezers because of Milton, the hurricane that just keeps on giving. And in doing that, we lost a lot of stuff that we probably would have been making fermentations with already. Not looking for sympathy, just stating what happened. Well, one of our VIP members, John Pickering, felt really bad. So he went on Amazon and found some dried fruit and sent it to us. And one of them was these 100% organic dried goldenberries. And I was like, I don't know what these are. And then I read the back. Goldenberries are known by multiple names around the world. They have been used by indigenous Peruvian people for centuries, thus granting them the name Inca berries, Pichu berries. They are also called Cape gooseberries. That I've heard of. Don't think I've ever had them, but, you know, interesting. Ever since their exportation to the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa in the 18th century. I would have thought it was like Cape Cod, not Cape of Good Hope.
Yeah.
You learn something every day, you know, that's kind of awesome. But they're good for snacks and trail mixes, baked and non-baked goods, yogurt and cereal, smoothies, etc. We have here 2 pounds. So we're going to make a mead with it. But I probably want to do something else first. And that is get the Everything that we're using here today has been sanitized in
The red bucket of sanitization!
as evidenced by the splashing going on all over the place.
He was in the splash zone this time.
Yeah,
yes.
What the heck? It's everywhere. That is sanitizer fluid, got all over the place. But I'm going to be using the return of the self-stirring cup to hydrate our yeast. And in doing that, we actually started using a new product that is optional if you really don't want to use it. But I actually really like this. It's called Go Firm. And to me, I actually like this better than I like using Fermento or things like that. Because this basically just, it's extra yeast nutrition, but it's really like the vitamins and minerals that they need to grow with. And I'm just going to use a 1/4 teaspoon, drop it right in there, not knock it over. Then we're going to add our yeast. And what yeast are we using today?
71 Beast.
That's right. Also known as Lalvin 71B-1122, or on this bag, just 71B. Wow, that's interesting. Usually it has the 1122. I have a half packet because I always have a half packet. My rule of thumb for yeast volume is this. Up to 3 gallons of must, which we're making about 5 liters, 1.3 gallons or so, you want to use half a packet. Up to 5 gallons, you want to use a whole packet. If you're making 3 gallons exactly, it's your choice. It doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to dump that all the way in there.
Thwack your packet.
And thwack the packet. Make sure that every yeast achieves its destiny. No yeast left behind. That needs to be a t-shirt. I also have 107 ounces of water for reasons to be explained later. I'm not going to use all of it to hydrate the yeast though. I'm just going to put a little bit in here. Just a little, few ounces. And this is why I use the self-stirring cup. Because it has ribs.
And the inside.
For the yeast pleasure. And that way you can mix it up. And then you just let it sit. And it does its thing. Let me throw this away.
Throw the yeast packet away too.
I'm going to throw the yeast packet away too. Okay. So now we have our yeast hydrating. We have our fermenter. Now this is the fermenter from North Mountain Supply. We call it the TARDIS.
I wish they could call it the TARDIS, but I'm pretty sure
That's copyrighted.
That's been taken by something. I can't recall what.
Now, the reason why we like this is because you can see through it, and it's 5 liters, which is 1.3 gallons. But also, it uses a wide mouth opening, and you can still attach an airlock with a really good seal. All those things make a difference. The handle is just a nice touch. But the real thing is, this square shape fits in the same space as a regular, like, 1 gallon fermenter.
Yeah,
I mean, how cool is that? So
fantastic.
It doesn't even take up extra space.
Its form factor is perfection.
And I'm just going to put this on the scale, and we're going to measure out first our Cape gooseberries, also known as Goldenberries. I think I opened it. We're going to start with 1 pound of these Goldenberries.
Good luck with that.
I have ways of making it work. So you just give it a little squeeze. It's okay.
Violence is the answer.
So here we go. It's not too loud. Too much. There we go.
Is that our sacrificial?
That is our
gooseberry?
sacrificial sample. They look kind of like raisins. They're kind of dry. They're very fruity though. Really nice flavor. I think with a mead, this is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
This mixed with honey, really spectacular. But anyway, we have 1 pound there.
I also think my choice of honey is going to be perfect.
Yep. For the honey choice, we're going to be using Sweet Squeeze Orange Blossom honey. Now, Derica thought the Orange Blossom would go really nicely with the Goldenberry. I agree 100,000%. We're going to add 2 pounds of honey. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not doing more honey, and I'll explain that as soon as I get the honey in there. Quite regularly when we make mead, we'll use 3 pounds of honey in a 1 gallon batch. And that gives us about a 1.100 or so final starting gravity. And that gives us 13% or so ABV mead. But this time we added some fruits, and these fruits actually have a little bit of sugar in them. A little over a ½ pound. So when I calculate that in with 2 pounds, it gives me roughly a 1.100 original gravity, making it somewhere in the 12 to 13%.
Did you take into consideration the volume difference, or does that not matter because of the mass taken up by the berries?
That's why I measured out the water.
Ah!
I calculated how much volume the honey takes up, which 3 pounds of honey takes up roughly a quart, about 32 ounces. So I calculated it down and got 107 ounces of water mixed with the 2 pounds of honey, makes for 1 gallon. Add in the berries. Sure, there's going to be a little bit of loss because the berries are going to soak some up, but we're still making a 1 gallon batch. And that's the important thing. All right, some other stuff that we want to put in here before we start doing anything else is a little pectic enzyme.
Now, I didn't go and research how much pectin was in the gooseberries themselves or the goldenberries themselves, but I also know from my deep dive on pectic enzyme that pectic enzyme isn't just a fighter against pectin. It breaks down the cell walls of the fruit, releasing more fruit flavors, more tannins, all the good stuff that we want in our brew. So I said, you know what? I don't even care how much pectin's in there. Let's put some in there.
½ teaspoon. And when it comes to breaking the stuff down, you got to remember something too. We're not adding any extra tannins to this one because the whole fruits dry down. There's a lot of little berries in there. So there's going to be a lot of skins, a lot of seeds, lots of things to add tannin. So if we need a tannin adjustment, we'll do that after the fact, but I don't think we're actually going to need to. The other thing I want to add is fermento, because this is a mead, even though there's probably plenty of nutrition in those berries. Fermento, super easy.
Kind of like our insurance.
Yeah, it's totally organic. You almost can't overuse it. So I'm just going to put in ½ teaspoon. Call it a day. If you want to do a staggered nutrient addition or anything like that, you totally can. We just tend to keep things a little bit more simple around here. And now I'm going to add some water. Just go about halfway. You can get sloppy with it as long as you don't splash your partner. Right about there. The reason why we only fill it halfway is because it's a lot easier to mix when you do that. And the reason why I said you could get sloppy with it is because in the beginning, aeration is a good thing. What does aeration do in the beginning, Derek?
Well, Brian, aeration helps the yeast multiply. That means that they can build up their colony and get ready to get to work to ferment the sugars in our brew. Also, aeration or mixing is going to help us have a better, appropriate, homogeneous reading. So when we take our gravity reading, we're not just going to get a bunch of honey at the bottom or a bunch of water at the top. We're going to get an appropriate mixture of both.
Now, we won't actually be able to get a reading on the berries themselves, but some of the sugars will come out. So I'm just going to go with the basic reading that we get and call it a day, not really worry about it. But to mix this up, I'm going to be using the spattle. It's a spoon, it's a pedal, it's both. You can get yours in the links below. And yes, I named it, and yes, they really do call it that on Amazon. I love it. This is a lot harder to mix than I thought it was going to be, because I mixed honey with dried berries and it just kind of caked.
You got a cement
but
at the bottom.
I did use blood temperature or better water. It's probably not hot.
Which helps.
Yeah. This may take a while. All right, so this is pretty well mixed up. I just want to make a statement about some of the stuff that we've added here. The Go Firm, the Fermento, and the pectic enzyme. If you don't have them or you don't want to use them,
it's okay.
Leave them out. I don't feel that any of those things are going to make or break this brew. I think they're incremental little increases in quality and insurance. That's about it. So if you want to leave them out, go for it. Won't hurt me at all. Won't hurt you at all.
The Go Firm is just there to help make your yeast be a little happy at the startup. The Fermade O is there to help them hopefully stay happy as they continue to ferment. And the pectic enzyme is just there to help break down the elements of the Goldenberries so that the yeast can get to all the good parts.
And potentially help it clear a little bit at the end. But clarity to us really isn't all that important. We've actually found that clarity can be somewhat detrimental sometimes. So, not a big deal. And I just added the rest of the water, all of it. So now we have a 1 gallon batch in a 5-liter container. Okay, before we add our yeast, I want to check pH. It's going to change ever so slightly with the amount of water that I'm going to be adding, but not by enough to worry about. So I want to check pH. Why do we check pH, Derica?
Well, it's a good thing to check pH because if your pH is too low, meaning too acidic, it can actually cause your yeast not to be able to build up a colony or even start fermentation.
That is super green.
If it is too high, meaning it's too alkaline or too basic, it could be a potential breeding ground for things you don't want to be breeding.
Right. There's a lot of things that like a more alkaline environment. A pH above 5.0 is kind of a breeding ground for a lot of nasty stuff, one of them being botulism. Now, I'm not saying that there's botulism in every honey, but there is some botulism in some honey. It's kind of rare, but it can happen. There was a thing where people were putting garlic in honey and leaving it for a while. Garlic can harbor botulism spores and so can honey. And the problem is the pH was getting to a range where it was safe for botulism to grow and people were getting sick from it. So that's why it's a good idea to not get your pH past that point. 4.6, magic number. Anything above 4.6, botulism can grow, but the real magic number is 4.0. In general, generally speaking, as an overall guide, it is the goal to hit for pH. Now, today we're sitting at about, I'm going to call that 4.5, wouldn't you?
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
It's a little on the high side of 4.5. So my take on it is, better safe than sorry. We're going to add just a little bit of acid blend to this to help it along. So we're using all North Mountain stuff here. We'll have links to this stuff in the description below. And this is acid blend. It's a mixture of, I always get the names wrong, tartaric, malic, and citric acids, okay, in different quantities. It's just a general acid blend. Could you just use citric acid? Of course. Could you just use tartaric acid? Sure, it's going to be a little tangy. Malic acid is more like the apple acid. It's a little more tart, if you will.
For this particular mixture, if you wanted to be specific to an acid, I would suggest citric.
Citric would be my choice if you wanted to just use one. We're going to just use acid blend today. And normally I start with like half a teaspoon. Today, we don't need to adjust it much. So I'm doing like just about a 1/4 teaspoon because I just needed to go down a little tiny bit, not much at all. So it's almost a 1/4 teaspoon. Notice I'm putting this in before the yeast. I used to put the yeast in and then we checked. Found out that might not be such a good thing because if we shock the yeast, like if they go in and they're like, ooh, this pH is okay for us because they don't mind higher pH. And then we suddenly change it, that could shock them. That could be bad. So we'll hold off on adding the yeast until we get the pH adjusted properly. Aren't you proud of me?
Basically, we're trying to make the environment set before adding the yeast so that way we don't cause any problems for that.
No shock. That looks more like 4.0 to me.
Woohoo!
Spot on, right to 4.0.
Fantastic.
That is kind of my magic number, and it seems to be, in general, good for most all yeasts. Some might like a little bit more acidity, but I don't think it's going to make or break a brew at that point. So, now we're going to add our yeast. But before I add it, let me show you what they're doing in there. And this is part of why we started rehydrating yeast. It's kind of proof of life, but the Go Firm really does give them a little bit of an extra edge, if you will. Gives them, just that little bit of extra nutrition. See all those bubbles? That means they're alive and good to go. I'm aware the instructions for Go Firm say, let it sit for about 20 minutes. Well, I'm impatient. It's going to be in here for way more than 20 minutes, so I don't really think that's much of an issue. And I just like to stir that up a little bit, get whatever I can off the sides, and then dump it right in.
All right, so he has a big blob at the bottom. So we're going to take our baster. We're going to take some of this liquid, put it back in there.
I didn't even see the blob.
Swirl it vigorously, or even agitate it with the end of the baster just to get it
You know what I
stuck.
think that is? I think that is Go Firm.
Okay.
Yeah. You probably should put the water in, then put the yeast and the gopher in, and then you won't get the blob. Yeah, because it's still there.
Do you want to use the tip of the baster to...
Just the tip?
Just the tip?
Guess I have to. Well, now that you said it, I have to.
It got globby. I'm sorry.
Again, oxidation at this point, not a problem. It's all stuck to the baster. It's everywhere. It's okay.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of scenario.
All right.
All right.
No more blobby.
Yay!
And I'm just going to mix that through. Because what's the next thing we have to do?
The next thing we need to do is take our original specific gravity reading. And this is important because it's going to tell us, are we in range for our particular yeast that we chose? And what might be our potential gravity, or our potential alcohol.
Okay, so because we use 71B, it's usually between like 13 and 15% or so. So that means I'm looking for basically 1.100 or below for an original gravity, and then we're safe. By safe, I mean it should run dry. The yeast should do everything they're supposed to do with no stress. In theory. Now, remember I said before, there's some sugars in those berries, about 0.027 points in 1 pound. So that means if I know, a little math for you, honey adds 0.035 points per pound in a gallon of must. We made 1 gallon. So that means 2 pounds would be 0.070 or 1.070 because it's actually adding to water. So 1.070. You with me so far? So if I had 27 points to that, I'm at 1.097. Now, some of the sugars that are on the outside of those berries are going to come off immediately. Some of them are in the fruit. The yeast will get to some of that. We don't know how much. So that's why I looked at that as my maximum. But I'm also just going to probably use this. I got 1.080 here. Works for me. If you were curious, 1.080 gives a potential alcohol of about 11% or so. So perfectly fine for preservation purposes and lack of vinegarization, because Acetobacter, which is the thing that makes vinegar, is already in here. It's in honey, it's in the water, it's in everything, it's on the fruit, whatever.
But in order to make vinegar, it needs to have alcohol and oxygen present. That's why oxygen at the beginning, when there's no alcohol, is great, because it's going to help the yeast build their colony so that they can convert these sugars into alcohol. But once they start doing that conversion, oxygen is bad because we don't want to activate those acetobacters.
Exactly. And those acetobacters can activate below 10% very easily. Between 10 and 15%, they have a lot of trouble. And at 15%, they don't. Now, again, that's not a hard and fast rule because acetobacters can't read just as much as yeast can't read. So, yeah, just keeping it in the range and you're probably okay. That's why a lot of like homemade apple cider vinegars and stuff have you dilute the cider down to 5 or 6% ABV, because that way the acetobacter can work a little easier. So, next step.
We need the lid and airlock.
Yes, we do. All right, so we have our lid and we have our little 2-piece airlock on there. These actually make it like the same size as a regular fermenter, but they also fit in fridges really easily.
Now this is not the smallest 2-piece. This is the size up.
Oh, that's the regular size 2-piece?
Right. So it's still short, but it's girthier.
Yeah.
So it can hold more liquid.
The really, really small ones, you gotta just keep an eye on because they can dry out a little bit. These, we've never had a problem.
Yeah.
Now comes the hardest part, the waiting. This can take up to 3 days before we start seeing activity, and that's okay. We get people that ask questions all the time, like, oh, I started to brew 4 hours ago, nothing's happening, what should I do?
Wait.
One person wanted to dump it out after 4 hours, and I said, no. Don't add anything, don't do anything, leave it alone. Mead and wine want to make themselves. We just need to get the heck out of the way. And I am not even kidding about that. Nope. This can take up to 72 hours before we start seeing bubbling happening. That's totally okay. Once that occurs, it's totally fine. We're going to put it in our ferment station, and probably anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks, this will be fermented out and we'll be back to give you the next step. Okay, it's been 3 weeks and 3 days, and we have not touched this. We were actually out of the country for a little while. We didn't do any swirls. We did nothing to it. It basically sat in the fermentation. So this is going to be a surprise when we open it up because I can tell that a lot of the berries are still floating.
Yeah, we do not recommend this.
Yeah, probably want to check on that more often than once every 2 to 3 weeks. And I'm just going to leave that loose for a second, and we're going to show you the inside. It's going to be as much of a surprise to you as it is to us. Okay, so looking inside there, I'm seeing it through the little panel on the back of the camera.
I don't see anything bad.
Yep, looks like they're just floating. They do look pretty dry, though. That bothers me a little bit.
It smells raisiny, though.
It really does.
It smells nice.
Okay, so... Oh, they're very moist, actually.
They are very moist.
We're going to take a reading on it, and then I'm going to mix it all up, because obviously, even if it says, like, low number or something, we're not going to rack it today, because it's just not ready yet. But it does actually look quite nice.
It's a nice color. It looks like it's
semi-clear. It's starting to clear. That's a good sign.
Yeah, I think this is going to be lovely.
Right now, it is sitting at, it's pretty close, 1.004. So it's not quite done yet. Pretty close, though. We started at 1.080, so we didn't start super, super high. Yeah, I think this could use a little bit more time. So what I'm going to do is pour this back in because everything was sanitized. And I want to give this a mix. I want all that fruit back in there. Now, somebody asked the other day that they said, how come the fruit in one of our brews didn't sink? Because another YouTuber had said that fruit always sinks during fermentation. Fruit does not always sink during fermentation. They apparently did some tests or something to bear that out. I have yet to see it, but it doesn't always sink, but it usually will soak up. Let me show you what some of these did. You can see the ones that were on the bottom and the ones that were on the top. All the wrinkly ones were the ones that were sitting on top, though, whereas the very, very round, full, and plump ones were the ones that were in the liquid. Now, as we said, we don't recommend doing what we did. Normally, you'd want to get in there and mix these around every couple of days, at least, to keep everything wet. We got lucky. Everything stayed wet. Nothing went moldy, because that is what can happen, okay? If it's not fermenting well and there's not a lot of CO2 in there, you could get mold to grow.
Yeah, I think that's what saved us, is that it did ferment well while we were gone. And so the CO2 created an environment that wasn't suitable for mold growth.
Right. Now, the fact that these fruits all puffed up like that is kind of crazy to me. It makes me wonder how much extraction we're actually getting from them. Because they seem to be holding, like, I'm trying to squeeze them. Oh, no, they'll pop. Okay, so they're just very full of liquid.
And gas, probably.
And gases. Yeah, it seems like they're full of gases more than they're full of anything else. Because they're fermenting from the inside out, so. Okay, this actually looks pretty good. I don't see anything to worry about in here at all. Did the fruit fully extract at this point? Maybe. The ones that didn't get touched by the liquid too much or that were kind of all wrinkly, I don't think that they would have fully. Usually it only takes 2 to 3 weeks for fruit to fully extract. We're at that point now. I'm still going to give it another week, maybe 2, and we'll see what happens. So, have my notes. Put it back on the fermenter, put it back in the fermentation, and we'll see you in a week. Okay, it's been 5 more days, and we're going to take another reading on this guy, and I'll give you another look inside. Now, as you look inside, you're going to see a lot of those berries are wrinkly again, because again, we didn't actually mix them through like we probably should have, but it looks like they survived just fine anyway. Now, what do I mean by that? Technically speaking, we should be swirling this around and keeping it wet. Now, that fruit cap is still wet, and it was at 1.004. It had a couple more points of gravity to work through. So I think we're fine. There was probably enough CO2 production to be okay.
We also mixed this rather well last time we were with you, and the bloated berries that were at the bottom ended up being on the top. So I think they released some of their, well, a good portion of their liquid based on what we can see now. So they were plenty of moist and didn't need that extra moisture anyway.
Okay, so it's 1.004, just like last time, which means we have a choice. We can let it sit some more, or we can rack this. Now, you might be saying, but it's not done. Well, it is done. It's not going to ferment any further without some sort of direct change. Now, in our experience, we've seen it where just racking it could be enough to make it happen, but my worry on this one is all that fruit that's now sitting there. If it's really not fermenting anymore, it's not producing any more CO2, that gives mold a chance to start growing. So I think it's time to rack this one.
I agree. We've pushed our luck so far, so
Yeah.
let's not push it any farther, shall we?
Believe it or not, this is a 5 liter. This is 1 gallon, which is 3.785 liters. So there's 1.15 more liters in this than in that. Just sounds crazy.
So hopefully you can see now why I call this the TARDIS.
Yeah, it's just crazy. But being that this is 5 liters, and I look at the level, it's only to about here. So I know there's probably only about 4.5 liters of actual volume used, and a lot of that is going to be the berries. So we guessed with the wide mouth 1 gallon, it might even be a little smaller than that, but we're going to go with it and see what happens. And I'm dumping our sample right back into the fermenter here, because if I pour it into that one, it could disturb lees, and it just would not work out in our favor, let's just say. And we're going to rack it.
So to rack, as always, we're going to put the destination lower. That's why it's going to sit on my lap. We're using an auto siphon. We have our source raised, and we have the cap on because there's lots of goop in there.
Now by source raised, she means this is above the destination. And I'm just going about halfway down, and I'm going to, someone said the perfect word to use it. I forget what they said. I'm going to say actuate the auto siphon. They said something else that was actually perfect. I forget exactly how they said. Prime it a few times, something like that. Because people always take the other words that I've used the wrong way. So, this is a family show. Yes, we make alcohol. It's all right. One thing though, I already put it up on its side, and I am going to go pretty deep with this one because I'm not worried about if I pick up a little bit of gunk. We're going to let this sit for a week and clear out, but I want to get as much product out as we possibly can, because I think we might be even less than a gallon on this one, just because the berries will soak up quite a bit as well. Okay, so we racked it, and there's a little bit more headspace than I might really like to have. However, this is still fairly young. It's only about 4 weeks old. There's probably a lot of gas in there, so I'm not really overly concerned, okay? And I'm pointing this out for a reason. A lot of people freak out over oxidation. I'm gonna tell you right now, in the hundreds of brews we've made, I don't think we've ever actually had it happen.
I think the only time we noticed oxidization was after it was in a bottle,
Right.
and we kept drinking a
There was
little
like
bit of the
this
bottle.
much
There
less
was
than the
this
bottle.
much of this big bottle.
Like 6 months later, we experienced some amount of oxidation. It just basically lost all of its flavor. It doesn't make it dangerous.
No.
There's no harm.
No.
But this is probably not going to be a problem, okay? If there was only this much in it, yeah, just use a different container. This is on the verge of maybe one of our 3/4 gallon bottles, but
Right.
it's so close that...
And so the question you have to ask yourself is, are you going to have oxidation from this headspace? Or are you going to have the same amount of possibility of oxidation by racking it again into a smaller vessel?
Yes. And it's like the lesser of two evils. Also, as I just gave that a swirl, there's CO2 coming out. So
Yeah.
CO2 will get into the liquid easier than oxygen, which means the oxygen will usually get forced out by CO2 as it's degassing. So that makes me feel even more comfortable with this, because this is only going to sit for like a week like this, and then we're going to do the next thing. So we'll see you in a week. All right, it's been another week. It's been sitting. Guess what? It's time to make sure we like this, and that means making some adjustments. This is something we've been doing for a while. What?
We're going to go ahead and rack this because we do see a thin sediment layer at the very bottom. So we want to make sure to get that good brew off the sediment, so that way when we make adjustments and have to stir things up, we're not reintroducing that sediment back into the brew.
Right, we're putting it into a pitcher. This pitcher allows us to do any mixing or whatever, and it also tells me how much we have so that we can get a size appropriate container to store it in for a little while. So we're just gonna rack this. You've seen this before. We have videos on it. I'm sure we've mentioned it already. We'll be back in a minute. It's time for some adjustments, which means we've got to take a taste. I had 2 glasses out here a minute ago. Did anybody notice that? It's because I thought we were doing an actual tasting. Instead, we're just doing the adjustment tasting, which is a different kind of tasting altogether. For that, we only use 1 glass. That way, we're both tasting the same thing. And I'm going to go back to my rule. If you're not having fun at what you're doing, you should be doing something else. That's why we always try to have fun with this. I have to say, this has such an unusual smell. It's so different. Like, it's berry, but it's not berry. And it's just very fruity, kind of almost a
Citrusy berry.
citrusy. I even get like almost a deep apricot kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, just lots going on in there. You gotta taste it though.
I know. You know how I like smelling
I know,
stuff?
just taste it. If you don't taste it, we can't move forward. She got lip goop on the glass. That's why she did that.
He doesn't like chapstick. It's just chapstick, but...
Okay. Right away, there's a good acidity hit.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely acidic enough. I even think there's a good tannin quality.
Yep.
Yeah. It's not like sandpaper mouth, but definitely some tannins there. This is rich and mouth-filling already. But what it is not is sweet.
Yep.
It was a 1.004, and then we racked it. We'll check it afterwards to see what it comes to, but this needs some sweetening, without a doubt.
I think if you really like tart, mouth puckering sensations, then you might enjoy this dry. I'm not hating this dry.
There's a piece of fuzz.
There's a little piece of fuzz.
Right.
Go away!
Got it.
It's just like suspended in the air too. It was almost like it was on a cobweb, but it's not.
It was just a piece of fuzz.
Fuzz.
But yeah, if you like sour kind of things, like mouth puckering, tartness, not sour isn't really the word. It's tart.
It's tart, yeah.
Which is similar, but not quite the same.
Right.
It's nice. But I like things to be a little sweeter than that.
Sure. And the honey note isn't coming forth enough, I think, that makes you think mead
This
right
comes
away.
across as a wine right now.
Yeah. So we're going to back sweeten it. But if you, if you like things tart, then you might like it just the way it is.
We made this with sweet squeeze honey, so we're going to sweeten it with sweet squeeze honey. Now, you can sweeten it with fancier honey if you want to and create a different effect. We're kind of going for just the goldenberry effect here rather than trying to alter the flavors.
So because we already have that almost citrusy, fruity note, the little bit that is inherent in orange blossom honey is going to go along
Complement it.
quite nicely.
Okay. Now, our method of sweetening. If you've seen any of our videos before, I'm sorry for repeating myself so much. Do you want to just get that little bit off there? There we go. She's going to wash her finger and all that. Don't worry about it. Our method of sweetening is add some until you like it and then take a reading. So you kind of have a target point to go after.
So,
Wash that finger.
yeah, but this was actually helpful in my tasting of that honey because it also has a strong floral note that I think will go along with this quite lovely.
Yeah.
I am sanitized.
The trick to making additions like we just did, though, is mixing it thoroughly in between. If you don't, you will have a bunch of honey in the bottom of your pitcher. Going to totally throw up your reading, but also throw up your tasting because you'll think it's not as sweet as it actually is.
I think you got to go the opposite way. I'm seeing it just kind of chasing it around.
Well, I do both, you know? I go this way for a while, and then I go this way for a while. Sorry, I have like a tickle in my throat.
We're in the
Lingering sickness.
the never-ending cough stage of our stupid illness.
My ear is finally 50% open.
That's
Yeah.
a vast improvement.
Yeah, just a couple of days ago, my ear would be like totally blocked. It was as if somebody had their hand over it. It really felt like that.
Which is really bad because that's his good ear.
Yeah, that's my good ear. This is the bad ear. So I couldn't hear anything. And she sits on this side of me for videos. When we're watching TV, it's especially bad. If she says anything, I'm like, what?
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 Don't hear a thing. Okay, I mixed it. It took longer than expected. I think also the color of this particular mead is very honey-like on the spattle. So it's kind of, it tricks you. It's tricksy.
I think the interior house is slightly colder than what it normally is.
Yeah, a little bit. Maybe a degree or two.
Because we're in that weird temperature zone where do we put the
We have
heat
the
on?
heat on.
Do we put the AC on?
It's 65 degrees outside. We have the
know.
heat on, which sounds a little crazy, but it's been getting down to like 40s at night. So
All right, so we make a joke when we sweeten things that, it smells the same. But when you back sweeten with honey, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I am getting a little bit more of that floral
Definitely.
note on the aroma, which is nice.
I put in a fairly significant amount. Now, people always ask, how do I know how much to put in? Just put in a little bit. You can always add more. You can't take it out if it's too much, though. Needs more.
I like it. I'm getting more of the floral fruity combo at the
Tastes like
beginning,
lime to me.
but the ending is definitely got a sharp lime note, which Brian's not a fan of.
Yep. More honey. Because here's the question. Would you drink it if it was like this and sweeter? Either way, would you still drink it?
Yeah.
I would never drink it as it is.
So
That's an important distinction to make. If you would,
know your audience.
yeah.
We're our audience.
All right, we got drippage again.
Oh no!
Gotta get to drip.
Oh no!
All right, I'm gonna mix this. See you in a couple minutes. This might be enough. I don't know. I will say this: in the picture, it does not look pretty. I don't know why, but it looks like green, murky swamp water. But in the glass, it actually looks kind of nice. It looks like a beer right now because there's a little bit of degassing happening, I'm guessing, or just the mixing. I'm making a little tiny bit of foam. I'm getting more honey character now in the smell.
I'm concerned that that strong ending note isn't going to go away with
It might not, but we're trying to mitigate it a little bit. It's going to mellow slightly, so that's why I'm not going as sweet as I might just for today. But, actually, we did not pasteurize this yet.
No.
We will be pasteurizing this.
Up front, for me, it's really lovely. On the back end, I'm still getting that note, but it doesn't seem quite as pronounced.
I agree. I think we've now hit a nice balance where it's got enough sweetness to make the acidity work well. And the triangle's working, okay? The three pillars, which is like your tannins, your acids, and your sweetness level. Right now, they're working kind of nicely together. It's got a little tang to it, but it's not like, whoa, I just drank a bottle of battery acid.
Slightly aggressive.
Yeah.
It's been toned down a notch. It's still definitely there, but it's not nearly as aggressive.
I think it's pretty good.
All right.
So we're going to move this to a bottle, and then we're going to pasteurize it. Now, I know some people don't like pasteurization. I will tell you right now that it's really, really safe if you do it properly. We use an immersion circulator, also known as a sous vide, which is actually the method, not the machine. And we heat it to 140 degrees Fahrenheit for 22 minutes. That's internal temperature of the liquid. At 22 minutes, I remove it from the water, set it somewhere where thermal shock won't hit it, usually something kind of insulated, like a wooden area or something like that, and let it come to room temperature. Leave it for a couple of days, and then you can actually just start consuming it.
I think this particular beverage is suitable for fortification if you want to go that route. Just know that fortification is going to change the flavor profile. It's probably going to make it even more punchy, as in a shock to the system.
I didn't write down what yeast we used for this one, so I don't know. But it's probably like 71B or Cote de Blanc or something. I'll have it here.
Editing Brian will go back in time. And
the reason why we're talking about that is because if it's something that's like maybe a 13 or 14%, it might be fine to not, excuse me. The reason we're bringing up the yeast type is because every yeast has a little bit of a different alcohol tolerance. And this is at like 13 or so percent, which means anywhere from like 12 to 14. So if our yeast has a 12 to 14% range, this might not actually re-ferment. One way to find out, put it back into a fermenter, put an airlock on it, let it sit. We could do that, and then if it ferments further and we want it to be sweeter again, we go through all the steps that we just did. So to prevent you having to watch us go through all those steps again, we're going to stabilize this. Now, stabilization can happen a couple of ways. There's the chemical way using sorbate and sulfite. We don't really do that, so I'm not an expert on it, so therefore I'm not going to give instruction on that. There's also pasteurization, which we do in many of our videos, and there's fortification. Now, there's other ways too, but those are the three main ones. I like the idea of fortification, but without knowing the alcohol tolerance of the yeast off the top of my head, and this is a good example, if you don't know the alcohol tolerance of yeast, fortifying is kind of a little more tricky because that means you have to go past what it could possibly be,
right.
Which means in some cases you're adding a lot more alcohol to fortify it. By the way, that's what fortification is. Using like a distilled spirit or a liquor or something that has a higher ABV than this to add to it to surpass what the yeast can tolerate, thereby stabilizing that brew. So in this case, because we don't know, I'd want to go to like 17 or 18%, which could be a significant amount of alcohol depending on what we use.
Yep.
So I don't know that I want to do that today.
No, we're not going to do that today.
Oh, I know.
I just wanted to put it out there that was an option.
I was just using that as a teaching example because it was perfect placement for it. It's almost like we planned it, but we didn't.
All right. So at this point, we're going to take another specific gravity reading to let you know to what sweetness level or specific gravity we got this to.
Right. By the way, if you've ever seen me doing this, I'm getting the star sand out of this so that I can get a more accurate reading. But I will also suck up a whole sample and then sometimes pour it back in. Be careful though, because you don't want to oxidize. But oftentimes I don't worry about it too much because a point or two isn't all that big of a deal. And I always say sweeten to your own likeness level. Likeness level? Sweeten to your own likeness.
Preference?
Preference. That's the word. Anyway, I didn't think we went too high on this one, but apparently we went higher than I thought. Wow. It was really, really, really acidic because it is now 1.038 final gravity. Okay, so 1.038 sounds super crazy high, right? Some of you out there are freaking out because you're like, oh my God, that is just ridiculously sweet. But you know what? If you could taste this, you would not say that because it does not taste ridiculously sweet. And that's where the flavor triangle comes into play. If you have something that is highly acidic or highly spiced, usually you can get away with a lot more sweetening to make that kind of round out and taste really, really good. Now, I personally would have gone even sweeter on this, but I know one thing. I may not drink much of this to begin with. Derica will probably enjoy it, and we're going to be pasteurizing it. Now, some people freak out and say that pasteurizing changes the flavors drastically. We did a video on this, and it's not that different. It's a little bit different.
It does change the flavor.
But not always.
Yeah. And
sometimes.
Not overly drastically.
Yeah. I mean, if you try them side by side, you can often tell the difference. But like if you tasted it today and tasted it again tomorrow, maybe sometimes, and usually it's a positive, not a negative. Like it doesn't take flavors away. It doesn't kill flavors. It just mellows them, similar to the aging process. So it's usually a good thing. People get all freaked out. I don't know why. All of a sudden, this has become a thing again, and it's just not really a problem. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but we've shown it dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and it turns out as a positive thing. Just saying. So we're going to do that, and we'll see you in a week to do the final tasting. So I just wanted to show something. We used a 3/4 gallon container because if you noticed in the last video, there was a lot of space. And now I knew it was only going to sit for a week like that, so I wasn't too concerned. Notice how little headspace we have. I probably could have pushed it a little bit, but as you pasteurize, it will swell up ever so slightly. But this is one of the big benefits of being a home brewer. Look at the glass of mead that Derica gets to enjoy right now.
Actually, I'm going to save it for our VIP wrap-up.
Oh, beautiful. So today, because if that sits too long, it's going to actually start fermenting right there in the glass because we did it already. We talked. But anyway, we'll see you in a week. Okay, it's been another week since we pasteurized it. It is time. This is the moment of truth. How did it come out? Is it any good?
Look at that. Just look at that.
It's pretty dark, but it's got a nice color. Look at that color.
Super dark.
It's super dark, but it's actually not. It's very deep golden. It's whiskey colored.
It's so weird, the difference between looking in there and then looking in your glass.
Yep. In the glass, it's beautiful. Absolutely lovely golden colored. It's whiskey colored. By the way, a couple of you guessed what that paper says. I don't know how the heck you did it because I couldn't read it through the glass myself. But if you look down into my glass, you can totally see. I mean, it's clear. You can see right through this beautifully well. I'm pretty sure she did an Instagram picture while I was doing all that.
I did.
Anyway, so. Nope, we're supposed to taste right after that. You gotta do smell first. On the smell, it's really nice and rich. It's got a deep fruit kind of thing going on. Apricot. I get a little apricot.
It's got
a little tang.
It's got all that in a bag of
and
chips.
There's some funk in there, and I don't mean in a bad way.
It's complex.
Yeah,
it's
there's a lot going on. It's an ogre. This is an ogre.
It's an ogre.
If you don't get that, go watch Shrek, meaning it has layers.
All right, I got to swirl.
Yeah, this is actually significantly better than I remember it being. We did sweeten it to 1.038, so this is along the dessert meads. One of my mustache hairs is irritating me. All right, I need to trim up the mustache. I'm getting the honey smell. I'm getting a floral, almost a citrusy kind of thing.
Yeah.
But again, a little bit of almost a dark fruit, like a plum, but not exactly. More like a.
Yeah.
I can't really describe what I'm getting. There's a lot of stuff happening. That's impressive.
It almost reminds me of something that's been oaked on the aroma.
Actually, it reminds me more of something that's been cooked. And that's probably what you're getting. You always get that kind of cooked, smoky thing from
it's
dried fruit. We use dried fruit to make this. So there's the cooked concept. A little bit of caramelized sugar in there.
And I personally really enjoy that. We have some more dried fruit recipes coming up in the near future. And as Brian just mentioned, every time we add dry fruit to something, it just bumps it up a notch. It gives it a slight more complexity and depth than I've noticed in just normal.
You want to taste this?
I want to taste this. All right, I'm going to stop talking and just get to it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to totally interrupt you, but... It has... Okay, I'll just take you on the trip. There's a distinctive honey flavor coming through in the beginning, but it has like a citric tang along with it that takes that sweetness level way down. You would not think this is 1.038. It does not taste it at all. Really nice, tangy, zingy thing going on from the berries. The honey's still there. It's still a little floral, but really it's like a combination of like our Rangpur lime and orange in the tang.
With maybe like a little bit of peach apricot combo in there too.
Apricot more than peach, but yeah, all that stuff in there. Wow, really, really amazing. It's funny because the smell. Okay, now the smell seems to match. Like now that I've tasted it and I do the smell, it seems to match better. When I first tasted it, I'm like, okay, the flavor is so much more acidic and like sharp than the smell. But now they kind of match after having both.
It kind of reminds me of some of the rando cocktails I made. They didn't have a name. I would just find stuff on the shelf and pour it in a glass.
Call it rando cocktails.
Yeah. But I was doing rum and the 99 peaches.
Oh, that's an interesting combo.
And it's kind of reminding me of that.
I like this. It's for as sweet, like as much sweetness as it has. It's got a good viscosity, but that tang, that sharpness cuts right through and makes it almost refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's wow, this actually came out really, really nice.
Yeah.
So thank you, John, for sending these.
Yes, absolutely, because I honestly probably wouldn't have looked twice at dried goldenberries and thought that would be a good thing to brew with. It's a fantastic thing to brew with. So get some goldenberries.
I want to say something though. We do still have to put a score on this. We haven't done it yet. One thing I'd like to say about this is 6 weeks old, like just about 6 weeks old, maybe a couple days short. It does not taste 6 weeks old.
No.
This tastes aged. It tastes like it's been mellowed for several months, even a year.
My mind,
that's impressive.
In trying to figure out how to compare it, keeps going back to bourbon, and I don't know why. But I think it's because of the complexity of flavors that I enjoyed in bourbon, where you get the sweetness and you get the alcohol and you get all the other notes.
The spicy notes.
Yeah. This has that similar complexity. I'm not saying it tastes like bourbon, because it doesn't really taste like bourbon, but when my mind is trying to find words...
Are you saying you got words?
I'm saying I don't got words. Trying to find them.
Anybody else get that reference? Come on, if you don't get that reference, I don't know how we can be friends. I got words.
Got words.
Everybody listen up. I got words. It's a thing.
It's a thing.
You know what it's from. Only because I think I said it the other day and I had to tell you. We don't have written down the alcohol content of this, so I'm going to just do a rough calculation here. Just because I'm curious. Started at 1.080, ended at 1.004, times 131.25. We're starting to use 131.25 just because, you know what? It's so much easier than trying to explain it all the time, and the difference is so minimal, but everybody uses 131.25, so we're just going to use 131.25.
Resistance is futile.
Yep, it really is. Even though, from a true accuracy standpoint, the other number is more accurate, but does it really matter? So this comes out to 9.975, which means with a little bit of dilution from the sweetening, I'm going to call this like around 9%. Yeah, that's what I'm going to put. So it's
8 to
probably
10 in that
probably
range.
8 to 10 or so. 9%. See, that's how precise we are about these things, because it just doesn't matter.
Which I'm glad that it's not a higher ABV than that.
I was expecting it to be a little higher.
It has a sensation of a higher
It does.
ABV, but I'm glad
sharpness.
it's not, because I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah. This is a 3/4 gallon container, by the way. We'll have links to these. You can get this from Amazon. I got one of these. I think we should have a couple more because
Yeah.
it's so. Here's the thing. We have 2-gallon buckets. We have a couple of 5-liter. Like we have one 5-liter bucket. We have another 5-liter the TARDIS container. We have a 5-liter narrow mouth glass. We have a 5-liter wide mouth glass that we can really only use cheesecloth on. But then we have several 1-gallon narrow mouth, which is slightly larger than a 1-gallon wide mouth. And then we have a 3/4. We have one of these. But then we have a bunch of half gallons. So the reason why we like to have multiple sizes is as you rack, you move it to the next smaller down container a lot of the time.
So you can limit your headspace.
Yep. If you recall, this was the one where we had a lot of headspace when we first racked it. I was not really comfortable with that. So when we racked it for the final sitting, like this is going to sit in this container for a while now, probably months before we get to it. That's why I don't like to go too far down during the tasting, but you can see it was all the way up here. This is only with small pours, how fast it goes because it's only a 3/4 gallon container.
But we're still well above the
yeah. People
shoulder.
ask all the time, like, "Oh, should I add water to fill that up?" No. You are changing the recipe. If you add water, you're reducing the amount of alcohol. You could potentially restart fermentation depending on the brew. There's a lot of reasons. I wouldn't do it personally. It dilutes it is the biggest thing. Like, I didn't spend all this time making this come out the way I did it to dilute it down because it not only dilutes alcohol, it dilutes flavor.
So what would you do is rack it to a smaller vessel as we have, or
add some marbles.
If you have food safe, something that you can sanitize.
All that kind of stuff.
And I stress it that way on purpose because if you just throw marbles in there, lots of them have lead in them, and you don't want lead. Learn from Rome, people. No lead.
We actually put them into a bag.
Yeah, because
and in something like this, we probably wouldn't.
Right, but you want to be careful in putting them in there that you don't break your fermenter.
Right, normally you put them in first, which makes it complicated. I know, it's weird, but that way you don't break things. I don't make the rules, people. I didn't design physics, it just is what it is.
If you did, life
would be a lot different.
A lot funner.
Glass would not break, for one.
And we could go to England like that.
Anywhere. We'd have portals.
We would.
Everybody would have, well, we would first, but everybody would eventually have portals.
All right.
All of our viewers would have portals.
Of portals, we're going to portal back to this beverage.
Ow, that actually almost hurt.
And we're going to think about numbers.
Okay, specifically, we're thinking about numbers 1 through 10 with the occasional 11, which is ye olde scoring system that we've gone back to. I like it. I actually really like the old scoring system much better. It's much easier, too. In this, I've broken it down basically into 3, you could even say 4 categories. 1 through about 4 is pretty much crap. We would not drink it. It might sit on the shelf for months, or if it's bad enough, we might just dump it out just to get the bottles back. 4-ish through 7-ish, and notice I'm saying ish. 4-ish through 7-ish is pretty decent. I would drink that. I might even have 2 glasses of it if somebody was offering it to me. I wouldn't turn it away. Then you have 7-ish through, say, 10-ish. These are excellent. This is where it's really, really good. The differences between these are very difficult to discern. It's usually being nitpicky a little bit, but there's that. And then the 4th category, I have to say it, is the 11. The 11 is, ours goes to 11. It's just fantastic. You could not imagine this being any better without drastically changing what it actually is. Okay, so that's the basics of it. I don't want to spend too much time on it because they understand 1 through 10. They get top 10 kind of stuff.
All right.
I'm still drinking.
Do you have a number?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. 1, 2, 3,
9.
8.5. I was debating between 8.5 and 9. As a matter of fact, I'm the low man, so I will give my reasons why. I tend to try to start at 10 and work backwards, or work upwards. If it's just like there's absolutely nothing to say bad about this, and it's better than I ever thought it could possibly be. Now it's an 11. But from 10 down, I like the tanginess, but after a while, there's an aftertaste that's just a little too. I don't know how to describe it. It's almost a bitter kind of thing. Not my favorite. That takes a little bit off. It makes it not a 10. The acidity of it, I think, is just a touch too much for me. Like, it's nice, but then I have problems with citrusy types of things. So this might be just a little too citrus adjacent for my liking. But that said, an 8.5 is awesome. That's really, really good. So you see how nitpicky I'm trying to be to give you the true experience of what this brew is actually like. And I actually really like it. I would drink it. I would grab this off the shelf and drink it.
Yep.
But we've made other things that are better.
Yes, I really am enjoying this. I was not anticipating enjoying it as much as I am enjoying it, and that's why I felt like I had to stay in the upper stratosphere of our numeration. But once I said the oaking thing, then it just got stuck in my head, and I'm like, what would this taste like? Oaked.
I don't think I would like it as much.
And I'm thinking...
Orange and vanilla don't work for me.
Okay, fair enough. But I was curious about that.
Yeah.
And then another thing that I was noticing in drinking more of it is that this particular flavor profile, I could not drink a lot of.
Yeah. Yep.
Because I think it would just kind of make me feel uneasy.
You hit on the head, the other thing that I couldn't actually put into words at the moment.
And that's a disconnect for me because I'm really enjoying the flavor. And so I want to drink more of it. But my stomach is saying, maybe you just want to relax a little bit.
This is something that came up recently when we were talking with, the people over at North Mountain. We were talking about flavors of meads and stuff. And they had mentioned that they didn't like a lot of meads that they had tried commercially because they were either too sweet or didn't have enough flavor. And I thought to myself, we've experienced that too. Our recipes, anybody that's ever made them, you tend to know what you're drinking.
Yeah, like, there's flavor.
They punch you in the face with flavors. We don't hold back on flavors.
Yeah.
We pack as much flavor into it as we can.
And
it's kind of funny that we've done that just on our own over the years.
In this particular instance, we may have gone slightly
I think we went too
aggressive
far. I think
on the
there's
flavor.
too much flavor. That's the problem. There's too much flavor.
So if you're looking for something just to have a small little sip, this is perfect as it is. But if you want something to drink a good volume of...
Now, that said, how would we...
Maybe less Goldenberry?
We only put in a pound. Now, a pound dried is kind of like 2 to 3 pounds fresh. So that's a typical amount. But I think Goldenberries themselves happen to be a little bit more tart, a little bit more flavorful.
Yeah.
So maybe 3/4 of a pound might have been just enough fine tuning to bring the honey more forward and bring that tartness back.
Also,
nitpicking
another
here,
way to dial
perfected.
in the flavor is perhaps steep them in a tea type situation. So steep them in hot water and let them steep over time and take little samples. And when you get the right amount of flavor, then use that tea as your base rather than...
But then you'd have to adjust for tannins.
Absolutely. Yeah, everything is a give and take. If you change anything of any of our recipes...
That's fair.
It's not just going to be like, oh, just this little bit's going to come out. No, everything else is going to... The balance is going to be off.
Okay. Agreed. She's right.
These are just thoughts.
There's different ways to do the same thing. Yeah. All roads lead to Rome. But... Overall, this is really, really good. We both enjoyed it. 8.5 and a 9. I mean, come on. It doesn't get a lot better than that. And as always, guys, thanks so much for watching and have a great day.
Bye-bye.